Okay, so we're going to go through these questions on the brain. So below is a drawing of the brain that shows the origin of the cranial nerves. State the direction from which the brain has been drawn. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're looking upwards through the brain. Then it says name the structures A, B, C and D. Okay, so this is going to be the front and this is the back of the brain. So A is the cerebrum. B, little lobes here, that's actually the pituitary gland. C is going to be the cerebellum. And D, although it looks a bit strange this way up, but actually that's the medulla oblongata. Okay, now it says state two roles of structure D, so that's the medulla oblongata. So that is the regulation centre, and so it controls things such as breathing, heart rate, swallowing. It also controls your vomiting reflex. Okay, C. The hypothalamus constantly monitors and regulates the concentration of hormones in the blood. Outline how the hypothalamus regulates the concentration of hormones in the blood. Okay, so if the hormone levels rise, what we have is we have negative feedback that kicks in. And the negative feedback in this instance is that the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland to inhibit hormone production. And that then, because less hormones are being produced by the pituitary gland, it means that other endocrine glands around the body are also inhibited. And so then of course that leads to the hormone levels falling. So that is negative feedback, because what's happening there is that the hormone is risen, and so we put something in place which causes that hormone to fall. Positive feedback would be that there's an increase, and then positive feedback would lead to a further increase of the substance. But here, because it's negative feedback, we're leading to a fall in the substance. So question 7. A PET scan can be used to investigate the activity of the brain. PET scans can help to diagnose conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. A radioactive isotope is attached to molecules similar to glucose and injected into the blood supplying the brain. The molecules with the radioactive isotope are taken up by healthy cells but are not metabolized. Instead, they emit positrons which can be detected by the PET scanner. The figure below shows PET scans of a normal brain and a brain of a person with Alzheimer's. Red and yellow indicate high emissions of positrons. Black and blue indicate low emissions of positrons. So there's our pictures of our brain. So here I can see that this is normal and this would be Alzheimer's. So with reference to the figure and the information above, explain the differences between the two PET scans. So this one here is emitting positrons, this one isn't. So number one is that the Alzheimer's brain, and I'm going to do it all from the perspective of the Alzheimer's brain. You need to pick one and kind of just tackle it from that side. So you could go for normal and do the opposite to the one that I'm going to do now. So I would say that it has less positrons emitted. So that means that there's less glucose has been taken up by the cells, which means that there's been less blood flow to those cells, and so therefore the brain has less activity and less respiration. Okay, question 8. In this question, 1 mark is available for the quality of spelling. We're not going to look at that. The figure below shows the left side of the cerebrum of a human. So here's the brain picture. So they have given us the anterior, posterior. Posterior is the back. So we've got the visual sensory area, visual association area, speech association area, and memory for words. So a person is reading a book, outline the events that take place in the nervous system from the time an image of a word is formed on the retina to the time the word is recognised by the brain. Okay, so what's going to be happening here? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is that the rods and cones, which are cells on the retina, absorb the light energy. That's the stimulus from reading the words on the page, or from the words on the page, and that triggers an action potential in the optic nerve, which is the nerve that passes from your eyes to your brain. And so for that we know that goes from minus 70 to plus 40 millivolts. Now that information they're telling us here is going to go to the visual sensory area, okay, because it's going to be passing along the optic nerve, which is sensory neuron. Okay, so it's going to go to the visual sensory area. Then that is going to be passed to the visual association area, which then will send that off to the third region in the brain, where we have a memory for words, and then we can understand what that word means. So to memory for words area. So that question was more about just following the areas of the brain and just putting them in the right order, knowing where the impulse would travel. Okay, next question. So we've got a reflex arc here. Okay, here's our pressure, stimulus being applied, our receptor, sensory neuron, up to the spinal cord. There's our relay neuron, back along a motor neuron to the muscle. So name S and T. So S is actually something called a dorsal root ganglion. And what it is it's where all the cell bodies of the sensory neurons kind of cluster. Okay, so it forms a kind of little bulge there. T, as we've just said, is a relay neuron. That's in the central nervous system. And then it says, explain why the withdrawal of a hand which has been subjected to pressure is an example of a reflex action. So they want us to understand what makes up a reflex action. Well, it's rapid, it's involuntary, it's a safety mechanism, and also it's not learned. It's actually instinctive. Okay, in this reflex, when pressure is applied to the receptor, impulses are generated in the sensory neuron. Outline what happens in the membrane of the sensory receptor in response to pressure. Well, first of all, the pressure causes distortion of the membrane. Okay, and that then opens the sodium ion voltage gated channels, and then sodium ions enter the axon. If we meet the threshold, then that will cause depolarization from minus 70 millivolts to plus 40 millivolts and will lead to an action potential. Okay, part 4. Explain why in the reflex arc shown in the figure above, impulses can only travel in one direction. Well, that's to do with the synapse. We know that the synapse is only released, or the neurotransmitter at the synapse is only released from the presynaptic membrane. So it couldn't go back the other way if it wanted to, and also we know that there are only receptors present on the postsynaptic membrane. Okay, question 10. So the figure below shows a vertical section through the human brain. Okay, so here's the picture of the brain they've given us. Name the structure shown above that links the two cerebral hemispheres. Well, that's actually this region here, which is referred to as the corpus callosum. And then it says, the table below shows the functions of some areas of the brain. Complete the table using the labels in the figure above. So coordination of posture, okay, we know that that's in the cerebellum. Control of the heart rate is going to be the medulla oblongata. Control of temperature regulation is the hypothalamus. And last one, control of speech is going to be the cerebrum. Okay, and the final question. Parkinson's disease is a disorder of the nervous system. People with this condition are unable to produce enough of the neurotransmitter substance dopamine. This chemical is required in neurone circuits in the brain that control movement. So they're not producing at the synapse, okay, they're not producing the neurotransmitter, okay, to allow the action potential to progress. So outline 2 roles of synapses in the nervous system. Well, they transmit information between neurons. They ensure, as we've answered in the other question, one-way transmission, and also that, remember we talked about previously, summation. Okay, summation was where if we have low level stimuli, they are not enough to trigger an action potential in the next neurone.